On today's program, I interview Stan Zuray. Stan Zuray is the star of the reality series Yukon Men, which returns for Season 6 this April 21st, 9/8 Central, on the Discovery Channel. But I've got him for 1 hour, and man, it is a great conversation. For many Canadians and possibly Americans, you'll remember the program Alone in the Wilderness with Dick Pernecki. Stan Zuray reminds me of Dick Pernecki, but he was never truly alone, as he had his ex-wife, his dogs. He's here to tell you the story, which is just absolutely amazing. Special thanks to the Discovery Channel, which provided special permissions for this program. Like the show, comment below, definitely want to hear what you have to say about this one, and subscribe to the channel. Enjoy the show. Stan Zuray, welcome to the program.
Hello, good to be on it, Russell.
Stan, let's, hey, do I detect a hint of a Bostonian accent?
Well, from what everybody says, you probably detect quite a bit of it. It doesn't seem like it's gone away much at all.
You were born and raised in Boston, the Dorchester section of Boston. Tell me about your life growing up in Boston.
Well, when I was little, just typical, neighborhood kid, and, nothing really stood out. I did like to go to, anytime my parents were taking us to the woods and stuff like that, the Blue Hills or the beaches, I love the beaches, the outdoor stuff. I did seem to like it more than like a lot of kids, and but as I got to be a teenager, there's not a lot to do in the city, and it seemed like kids, they just gravitate towards getting into mischief and trouble and stuff like that, and got into a lot of that kind of stuff. And
like, I don't know. I'm from Vancouver, Canada. Is Boston a tough town?
Well, there are definitely sections of Boston that are tough, and I don't know why, but it seemed like as kids we always gravitated towards those sections and a lot of the trouble. I did like to go, do some pretty healthy things, fishing and stuff like that. Scuba diving, even did a lot of that. Always get out to the beaches and stuff and do all that sort of stuff. But there was when I got to be old enough and I had friends going off to, into the service and stuff like that, things kind of started collapsing around Boston. The heroin epidemic and the end of the hippie peace, love generation, that was all falling apart, and things just got pretty grim. I used to work at a tire shop as a tire changer mechanic, do like mechanic work and stuff like that. I did that for all during my, I worked for them when I was 12 years old, giving out papers, sales pamphlets, to the houses in the neighborhoods. And then at 14, I started changing tires. So I did that right up until the day I left Boston.
So you decided to leave Boston. It wasn't the place for you. You moved to the West Coast. What was life like, and how was it different on the West Coast?
Well, I didn't really know, being from an inner city neighborhood in Boston, I didn't really have this concept of, the country and what somebody, how to, I had heard things that people were, living good lives, and growing gardens and living in the woods and places in Oregon, and heard these stories, and stuff like that. So that's what drove me to the West Coast. But when I got there, I ended up like in Berkeley, and a place outside of Berkeley called Canyon, but it's all really close to the cities. I went down to LA, I went into Northern California, but what I found myself doing was like just going from city to city to city, and I drive through these country areas, but I didn't know anything about how to live there. The concept, it's hard to explain, but the concept wasn't even in my mind. But little by little, I met people that were doing things in the country a little more, and so I just started heading north, and that was my way of getting away from the cities. But all the way into Canada, even, I find myself, after I cross the border into Canada, I find myself in Vancouver, and I'm in a city, a big city again,
Let me ask you this. Now, Vancouver, of course, is my home city. I live in Vancouver right next to Stanley Park. What were you doing to make ends meet from the West Coast, Oregon and whatnot, all the way up through to Vancouver? How are you making money?
Well, especially in those days, you could live, like when I was in California, I mean, we lived off of, the dumpsters and stuff like that at the stores. I mean, we just, you go to the back of a Safeway, and in those days there was, none of the stuff that they would throw out was covered, it was all open containers and stuff like that. And you're talking brand new stuff, and, stuff right out of the stores that maybe was going to expire in 2 days. And I mean, we had, everywhere you went, all up and down the West Coast, all the way across country. I mean, if you could find some gas for your vehicle, which, it was just the way it was in those days. Gas was so cheap, and I could fix my, if there's something wrong with my vehicle, I could, I certainly didn't have any money. I remember that was one of the problems crossing the border into Canada. I didn't have enough money to get into Canada. They wouldn't let me in at a number of border check places, and so didn't worry about it, But then again, in order to not worry about it, the things we did, like I say, living out of the dumpsters and just getting by, and usually there was always somebody with money, a lot of times you'd be traveling with somebody and they wanted to go somewhere, and if you had the car, they had the gas money, so I mean, you're living on just about nothing, the whole country was different back then. You could pick up hitchhikers and it would be a normal person, as opposed to nowadays that, 50% of the people you picked up hitchhiking would be dangerous to pick up, in those days. I remember hitchhiking back in those days too. This is just as a side note, I remember hitchhiking back in those days and actually ended up where I was going with more money than when I took off, like some nice old couple would pick you up and they'd say, "Where are you going?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm heading to the West Coast," or "I'm going here or there," and they'd give you $5, and just say, "Well, here, this will help you," And it was crazy. It was crazy. It was a whole different atmosphere in the country back then.
Were you searching for something, or were you simply lost at this point in your life?
Well, there was a little bit of element of both. When you say the word lost, I can think of myself many, many times just sitting sitting someplace and just wondering what the hell's going on in, my life, in the world, where am I headed, because I didn't know, like, again, for being from an inner city neighborhood in Boston, I had no concept of the woods yet. That wasn't something that was clear in my mind. I mean, I'd never hunted, I'd never trapped, I did a lot of fishing, but not in any kind of a survival mode, and so I was definitely lost, but I was also wanting to get away from the stuff I had been doing in Boston, the being involved in things that were pretty shady, that could get me in a lot of trouble, get me put in jail, like any kids, I mean, that's just what kids do, and then, last thing, I just didn't want to get a permanent job and grow up in a city and spend my life in that kind of environment. And so I knew there was something there just had to be something else. And so I was looking for something else also. Lost, but looking.
You come into Canada, you stay in Vancouver for a while, you don't find what you're looking for here, you continue north into northern BC. What happens from there?
Yeah, in Vancouver was where I just said, here I am, I'm in another city, you meet some nice people, you meet some bad people, same old thing, and that's you're maybe looking for these people that you heard about back east who have a little farm somewhere and live a good life, and but you're never finding them, and that's when I said, well, I just looked at a map, and I literally looked at a map, and I looked at the area up in northern British Columbia, and it was really isolated, no roads going up into it. There was some of them that had a logging road, mining road, old mining road, heading way up in 100 miles up into the middle of nowhere. And I said, I'm going to take one of those. And I actually looked at this one town too. It was called Manson Creek. It was north of Prince George, and had a old mining road leading to it. And the road kind of ended, around there. And I said, someplace like that. And so I just got I had a Volkswagen at the time, and I just started buying. That's where I started buying tools. Buy like an axe, buy a bow saw, I bought a rifle at a pawn shop on the road to there, and just some food, and hit Prince George, and literally met some people there. Spent a couple of days there, and just immediately left, and just started going up that dirt mining road, and it was about 100 miles up the dirt mining road, you're crossing little creeks and stuff like that, and real unimproved road, and got to this little town of Manson Creek that had 22 people in it. 11 of them were illegal Americans, and 11 of them were permanent, residents of the area. So it was a real tiny little town up in the middle of nowhere, and that's where I stayed for a year and a half.
How the heck you even got there?
Well, I broke my boat transmission on the way up. It was a really rough road, and a rock hit the transmission, and I kind of wobbled into Manson Creek. So that was as far as the Volkswagen ever went. But that was okay, because I was where I wanted to be. I met people, I just met people there that, some people were living pretty good. They had a nice cabin, and they were miners and stuff, but they actually, some people had found this jade mountain up there, and the largest find of jade in North America at one time, and and they lived pretty good. They made jewelry and did mining and stuff like that. And then there was an old trapper and an old miner, and they lived in old log cabins out in the woods, and then there was a native family there that lived really basic, and they taught me hunting and trapping and how to make snowshoes and all this intricate little stuff, totally out of. They didn't even have a drill to do the woodwork on the snowshoes. They used like a bow drill and a filed nail for a drill. They were. They just didn't even think twice of stuff like that. There were drills around, but they didn't own one. They didn't worry about it, and just amazing, watching the way they were with the animals and hunting and stuff. And that's where I had my first taste of what became that I just recognized this is what I want to do. This is the life I want to live. I don't want to be tied down to having to go back to the city and for everything I need. I can spend long periods of time out in the woods, and that's where I found it.
So you applied to be a Canadian citizen and lived happily ever after.
Yeah, except it would have been nice to have tried to become a landed immigrant, is what they call it. That's when you apply for citizenship. That's the first step. But there was, back then the BC government, and maybe even, I'm not sure now, I kind of forget, but it was probably happening all over Canada, but for sure the BC government wanted all the hippies out of Canada. It was just a political decision at that exact period of time, and a lot of them were illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants, running from the draft, and they just wanted them out. And so what they did was, while I was up there, I was new to the area. I was one of the newest of I was the newest of the 11 illegal immigrants up there. And most of the other guys there, I think almost all of them, the rest of them were there because they were dodging the draft. But it's really hard to get somebody thrown out of Canada for just being there illegally. So what the RCMP and the authorities did was they sent people up into the country disguised as hunters and trappers and hunters and fishermen, tourists, and they scoped out where everybody was. But because I was new, I wasn't on their radar, and so they left after they did all this scouting around, and then they came back later on. Again, I was lucky I wasn't, somewhere where they saw me, and they rounded up all the Americans there. They just flew in planes to the lakes and came up the roads in the police vehicles, and they rounded everybody up, and they just found. Well, most of them had marijuana on them anyway, because they were hippies and everybody had marijuana back in those days. But anybody that didn't, they just found marijuana on them. They just laid it on them and made sure they had a dope charge on them, and that way they could deport them easily. Because it's hard to deport somebody for just being there illegally, but it's easy to deport them if they got a dope charge on them. So that's what they did, and that's how they got everybody out of there. And at that point, I said, well, I'm going to spend in the winter because I got a cabin half built, but I'm going to have to leave, and I'll find a new place to live, even though I knew that was what I wanted. And at that point, I said, well, Alaska is my country. It's legal to live there. And after the winter, I'm just going to go to Alaska, and I'm going to do the same thing, find the same kind of place as here up in Alaska.
I tell you, that's brave, man, because, we all look at the map, and Alaska is white. You're going to somewhere that you've never experienced cold like this before. I know it gets cold in Boston. I know it gets very cold in Manson Creek, but it must get a lot colder in Alaska.
Yeah. Manson Creek, we saw 40 below. I saw that a number of times. But it was, we were pretty high up a little bit high up in the hills there, and it just didn't get to that 50, 60 below like it can get here in Alaska. It is really cold here in the winter. Sometimes it's like being, I always tell people, sometimes you almost feel like you're out in the moon with a spacesuit on, all your clothing being the spacesuit, and the cold being the moon environment, because it just feels like that sometimes, and you have to be really protected from that cold, but you learn to deal with it, and you keep moving, and that's what makes it so cold, because if anything happens, if you get sick, you get a little cold or stomach ache, or you get a little injury or something like that, because it is so cold, those little things can become deadly, in that kind of cold if you're out in a place where it could take you 8 hours or 2 days to get back to town where there's help, So the cold is definitely the most dangerous thing up here.
I grew up in Alberta, and it gets to minus 40 there.
Yeah.
Minus 40 is very cold. Your face freezes, you can't talk if you wanted to. What's the difference between minus 40 and minus 50 and minus 60 in terms of what it feels like on the body?
Yeah, somebody could say they'd probably say like minus 50, or say minus 40, because I'm real familiar with that. So you get like minus 40, and somebody could say, well, what's the difference between that and minus 50, 10 degrees colder? And they might think, boy, once it gets to minus 40, how could you even tell the difference anymore? It's so cold. But there is a distinct difference. You get something 10 degrees colder, and it's just another level again. And I remember one time in Tanana here we had negative 76 official at the airport, and in the low-lying areas of Tanana, it had to be at least 80-something below. Back then, nobody had any thermometers that could read that cold anyway, but now that was incredible. I mean, you had to be totally dressed the minute you opened that door and walked outside, and that was something else. I don't know. It's clothing. You have to be healthy. You have to have good clothing on, and surprising, even at 76 below, if you had to for, a few seconds or something like that, you could pull your bare hand out of your mitt and expose it. But boy, you've got to get that glove right back on.
So when you went to Alaska, I mean, you're not prepared, I'm sure, for this weather. You've never experienced it before. What kind of clothing are you wearing? I mean, I would think you'd have to have furs on and proper layers and, professional stuff.
On the way up to Alaska, I bought some Army surplus stuff in a store there, and it was one of the things was an Army surplus bag. It was an old down bag that was really terrible. It could barely keep you warm, even at pretty warm temperatures. And I bought this parka that had this terrible ruff on it. It was a synthetic ruff, and it was really stiff parka, and not very well insulated. All the clothing we had was all cotton stuff, cotton sweatshirts, cotton everything, which is the worst stuff you can use up in the cold, because if it gets wet from sweat, it just stays wet all day. And really bad. No hat. A lot of people now I wear a nice fur hat all the time. I think I had a stocking hat, just a regular old stocking cap, and it had two big clumps of fur where my ears are that I sewed on, off of a fox or something, and to keep my ears warm. And it was pretty bad. I remember that first winter when it was getting cold. It was hard to even stay warm while I was cutting wood, and ended up bringing the sawhorse into the cabin, which was just a dirt floor cabin with a sod roof on it. But I remember bringing the sawhorse inside and cutting my firewood inside. I couldn't, my clothing was so bad that I couldn't even stay warm while cutting wood. You'd think you'd stay warm cutting wood, because your body heat would be, your metabolism would be high and staying warm. But it's just, it was pretty grim for a while. Little by little, my ex-wife, she would go out and comb the sled dogs and get the fur off the sled dogs, and then put it in between two blankets and quilt the stuff kind of, and then make a pair of boot packs out of the quilted blankets and stuff like that. And then little by little, clothing started getting a little better, and we found we had these big old mitts that were, again, army mitts, and we started adding caribou, enlarged them with caribou, would add sides to them and make them big, so you could put a lot of stuff in them and fill them up with feathers from ducks from the summer. We kept all the duck feathers and down from all the ducks, and we would fill them up. It wouldn't even be quilted into it. It was just literally we'd take duck feathers and stick them into the mitts, and then we would stick our hands in. So every time you pulled out your hands, some duck feathers would come out. And so every time you went out for I'd run my trap line and stuff like that, you'd have to get a whole bunch more duck feathers into your mitts, and I mean, things like that. There was some pretty incredible things we did to live that first winter. I mean, we ate our whole sled. Well, we ate 2/3 of our sled dogs, and to survive that fall and stuff like that. It was either that or quit. It was either that or just give up, and that wasn't an option, not after all I had gone through to get there.
Wow. So there's a picture here, heading home with catch of 2 wolves. Are you catching wolves and eating them? What are all the animals that you are catching and eating?
Back in in that particular picture there, I'm doing that. That was not like the first winter. That was, I think you're looking at a pretty large team. That was probably, a number of years into my living up there, and life's, a little more stable, and I am catching wolves, and the wolves, like when we trap those wolves, I would tan them, skin them and tan them, and then I would use the fur for ruffs for my parker and for mittens, backing on the mittens, and then I would also make a little money by selling other ruffs, fur ruffs that I would sell in the local store here, and people would buy them right up. If you made a wolf ruff, tan wolf ruff, and put it in the store, and back then it didn't seem like much, but you could sell something like that for $50 back in the 70s and stuff like that, and that'd be the same as selling it for $200 now, and you could make money that way. And so those wolves were really valuable to be able to catch wolves like that. And then the meat from the wolves would get cooked up in a big dog pot, half of a 55-gallon drum. That's what we call up here. That's a typical dog pot up here to this day. Everybody in town that has dogs still has a half of a 55-gallon drum, and that's how they cook their dog food. And you just cook up the wolf meat and feed it to the dogs.
Oh, so you never ate the wolf meat?
I have eaten wolf meat, but really, back in, at the time you look at it like that picture there, there isn't like a food crisis, and I have plenty of moose meat for myself, or bear meat, and every life is, like I say, better than that first year up there where we had to eat the dog team. And, I have eaten wolf meat, but, in that picture there, those wolves probably went right into the dog pot. The dogs are what's eaten. If a person has a dog team with, say 7 dogs or 10 dogs or something like that, and there's 1 or 2 people in the house, the dogs are by far what's eating the volume of food. And so it's really, they're the ones who need the food. It doesn't take much to keep a single person alive, but, a team of 7 or 10 dogs, they need a lot of fish. They need a lot of meat, And
you have a beautiful dog here, quarter wolf pup. So you were breeding dogs with the wolves?
Yeah, well, the dog, when I left Canada, one of the guys that got deported out of that town of Manson Creek, he had a half wolf dog, and he got it off of a miner that got a pup out of a wolf den, and he bred it to his wife's Newfoundland Labrador. So so there was this litter of pups, one of which got kept and got raised by that miner, and he gave it to one of the illegal Americans in the area because he didn't want it after a while. And when that guy was forced to leave Canada, he gave it to me. So that's how that dog got into my hands. And when I went to Alaska, I took that dog with me, and so that's how I got up into Alaska with a black, stocky-looking half wolf, half Newfoundland Lab dog. And
Don't tell me you ate that dog, Stan.
no, but actually, back in those days, it was just the way I did it, especially to any dog that when he got really old and had, you know, he lived for a number of years, not pulling sled, just kind of hanging around with me and being a house dog and just, you know, till he got so bad he started getting cancer and a number of other problems, started going blind, and finally I had to put him down. But when I did that, and I did this to, you know, any dog that gave its life to me like that for all those years, the last thing is it's just the way I thought back in those days, and I kind of still think this way too. You know, I did skin the dog and use his fur, and I still have mittens to this day with some of his fur in it, and I made sure that his meat went into the dog pot and got that he got used, because the last thing I would ever do to a dog like that had given me his life would be to just bury him in the ground or just waste him. And even to this day, I don't do that anymore. You know, I'm a little more civilized nowadays, but even to this day, I'll you know, like if I have a leader that's been with me for his whole life and stuff like that, we'll go for a walk in the woods somewhere, and he'll go somewhere where, you know, the foxes and the wolves and stuff like that can eat him, and he'll go back into nature. I'll not ever throw a dog like that into, you know, like a lot of people. You know, like I've been around a lot of rural areas and seen, you know, people throw dogs in the dump, you know, or they bury them in the ground somewhere, or, you know, that kind of thing. Or they'll bring them to a vet, and the dog gets, you know, burnt up, and I just don't believe in that. I believe that a dog should go back to nature. He should be, you know, used in some ways. It's just a funny way I am. You know, it's just maybe it has to do with, you know, I've seen a need for things too much in my life to waste something like that.
For those listening, it's hard to understand, you know, how things are. They're so different in the country, especially in the country you're talking about. Like in the city, people are just totally different. Now, when I grew up, my dog ate all our chickens one night. Killed them all, ate half of them, right? My dad shot my dog, which really sucked when I was 14. But, you know, in the country, that's just what you do, right?
Yeah, and once he did it, he would do it again. That's I'm sure your dad was aware of that there's no once he tasted that blood of that chicken, it was absolutely going to happen again. And yeah, I know it just and he grew up in a lot harder time and stuff, and with me it's a matter of respect. I mean, I would go out of my way, even if I didn't need the fur at that moment. If I had a dog that had given me its life, pulling hard for me and being loyal all its life, that dog would get especially used. I would try to use that dog for something special, and I would make sure that you know, its life went back into the team, and it would almost be like I don't know how to the word, but like a a psychic thing or something that I felt that this dog's, you know, everything, all the good stuff of this dog would go. There was a way to put it back into my team and be really respectful to that dog. And, you know, I would certainly not expect anybody to. I realize how that must sound to a lot of people, but it was not a bad thing. It was done out of respect. You know, that's all I can say.
Tell me about your daughter, Monica.
Monica was, Monica became my daughter 2 weeks after me and my ex-wife lost our baby at birth in the village. We were living 40 miles north of the village of Tanana, and we came into the village where there was like a hospital clinic in the village at that time, but, you know, they didn't have a lot of facilities in there at all. And when she came in, we came into the village to be closer to, you know, medical people, you know, during the last couple of weeks of her pregnancy. And she had started having difficulty, and the baby died at birth, and there was nothing they could do. They couldn't do an operation and stuff like that, which if we had been in the city, you know, there wouldn't have been any trouble. They just would have done a C-section and stuff, and it would have been all okay. But so 2 weeks after we lost our baby at birth, we were approached by a mother in the village whose daughter was had a 3-month-old baby, and she was very young, and her daughter wasn't ready to raise the baby. Her daughter still wanted to go to school, and the mother knew we had just lost a baby and asked us if we wanted to come over her house and meet her daughter and see the baby, and would be maybe interested in raising the baby. And so that's how my daughter Monica became, you know, my daughter. And just a week later after that, we loaded Monica into a sled and made our last trip. It was springtime, and the snow was melting, and spring was coming, and the rivers were all going to open up, and we made our last trip on hot bare ground, 40 miles north of the village, and that's where Monica lived and raised for about 5 years. It was out in the wilderness.
The audience will be looking at all the pictures of Monica here. She'll be more of a hardcore naturist than you, then.
She should. Now, this is really funny. That's a good question. And what happened when she was about 5, going on 6 there, me and my ex-wife moved out of the wilderness and moved into the village of Tanana here. And, you know, we had lived 11 good years out in the, you know, middle of nowhere, and wouldn't trade it for anything, and I would suspect that she would not trade it for anything either. However, when she left to come up to Alaska, she was like, you know, a little older than 18 years of age, and she never even had a license to drive. She had never really had a career job or anything like that. She wanted to go do that stuff, and I didn't. It was, and basically, you know, the way I put it too was, one of us was willing to spend their life and die on the Yukon River, and the other one wasn't. And so we parted ways, and you know, Monica being a girl, it was decided that, you know, the best place for her was with her mother. So Monica was raised on the East Coast. After 5 years of her only friends being sled dogs, and being in the woods and traveling at 40 below in a wooden box or in a sled with, you know, bundled all up, and she's been through some hellacious conditions, whiteouts, and all sorts of stuff. After 5 years of that, she grew up and was raised in the city, and her mother was really strict and made sure she went to good schools and stuff like that. And she became an aerospace engineer for NASA for, I think it was like about 12 years, and went to engineering college and then had that job with NASA. And she's doing engineering work right to this day. She's got a family and lives back in Rhode Island. And what's really funny about the question you asked is that if she goes to a store and buys some raw chicken, and it's in a plastic bag, and she thaws that out and goes to cook it, she almost gags sometimes at the sight of the blood in the bag. And when I learned this, it was so funny. And one time she came up at a later date and was out with my daughter Caitlin, and they were driving their own dog sled behind me, and we came up on a wolverine trap, and she was just I didn't know at the time how it affected her, but she just because I had to kill the wolverine. It was alive and everything, and it was. She's very much a city girl in many ways.
Like your life, but in reverse.
Exactly. Yeah, she has no. She would have to go through a lot of changes to live this life, But she does have it in her blood, so I think she could maybe make the conversion. It's in her blood to be wild and free and in the wilderness.
Life has truly provided for you, Stan. Life has provided for you. That's incredible. You have not sought fame and fortune, yet now, I don't know about the fame or the fortune, how you conceive it, but, you've got this show, Yukon Men. It's on Discovery Channel. You've just been picked up for another season. We haven't hit the tip of the iceberg here. You were big time into Iditarod. You got remarried to a beautiful woman. Where do we go from here? Yeah, let's talk about the Iditarod and what you did with that.
Yeah, the Iditarod, that one had to be, and it still is. It's one of the coolest things I ever did in my life. It was kind of like a little shining star in a life of, really was a lot of hard work, and it was just a friend of mine who had wanted to race, a friend of mine, Mike McCann, who had wanted to race the Iditarod for years, wanted to put a team in it, and had a yard of sled dogs, which he drove a little, but he had so many other things going. He loved flying and airplanes and all that, and he just had so many things going that he never really got the dogs tuned up enough to race it himself. And one year he just got tired of never accomplishing that dream, and he had a little extra money from, buying fish that summer, and he said, I'm going to put Stan in the Iditarod. And at the time, I owned like 7 dogs, and they were just worn-out trapline dogs from being out in the woods with them and trapping, and just got my trapline all out. And it was now dead of winter. It was the end of December, and I get the message that Mike wants to put me in the Iditarod. So I get about 7 more dogs together, and I get in this race, and long and short of it is I just do really well. And, I was 9th place Rookie of the Year, held that 9th place finish, highest place in rookie to finish. I held that for like about 10 years before somebody finally tied me, and came in 10th the first time he ever raced it too. So, 9th, the first time he ever raced it too. So, it was just great, and people helped me do it and got behind me, and it was a pretty cool thing.
Incredible. There's just so much to talk about, but not enough time. Let's warp to the point where, I don't know, either you're being approached or you approach Discovery Channel and this Yukon Men program out of nowhere happens.
Well, the background to this is, this interest in Alaska and this subsistence living is what it's called. That's what people kind of call it, as opposed to like sport hunting. There had been, some on some sportsman's channels. There had been some, hunting shows and stuff like that. But Discovery was, and the networks were just starting to pick up on this idea of people living out in the woods and actually, who kind of needed meat more than just going out and wanting to put a little deer meat in their freezer. I mean, this is what a whole country did. If you go back, if you go back 50 years, the rural areas were just, this is how people lived. You go back 100 years and everybody in the rural areas did this, But the subsistence living of people who went out and hunted and fished and needed this meat and ate it all and lived, made fur products and stuff like that for themselves. That was just starting to become a concept in the network's eyes, and they saw some interest in it. So basically, Discovery said to this guy they knew that ran a small production company in New York, Paper Out Productions, they said, if you can find some people up in Alaska that live this kind of lifestyle, we'll promise you we'll view a promo tape. And so this guy said to his secretary, this guy Al, who runs this really great guy, he's our boss, and boss when when the filming is going on, and so he says to his secretary, "Go find me some people who do this thing," And so she starts calling around, and she looking around on the internet and all that, and she comes across this guy up in Alaska, in Fairbanks, Alaska, 150 miles away from here, who's got some hunting videos. He's a big game guide and runs a fish processing plant in Fairbanks that buys our fish out here in the Yukon, and he finds him and says, "Do you do this kind of stuff? Do you know anybody who does this kind of stuff?" And he said, "Well, I know this guy living out in this village of Tanana who does this kind of stuff. He's a good friend of mine, and he also does it with a dog team. He uses mostly dog team when he traps and hunts instead of snow machine, and so that was how it happened. And my friend in Fairbanks got in touch with me and sent me a message, and I asked him if I'd be interested in this at all, and I said, yeah, sure, I'd talk to them, and numbers exchange, and I get in touch with the secretary back in New York, and we start talking. I start sending her pictures of what we do up here, and what they originally were looking to do was find a number of people all through Alaska who were doing the same thing, and then just like a lot of shows are formatted, they have multiple people all spread out all over a large area, and they just every show they show a little of every one of them. Well, I was sending her all these pictures of me and other people holding animals and trapping and all that. And she said, who's these other people? And I said, well, they're just people in the village here. They do the same thing. There's a whole bunch of us. We all do the same thing. And she says, well, would they be interested in doing the show? And that's how the show happened. That's how the show became a show, not of different people spread around Alaska, but a show of a village and people working together and living together all in the same area. And that's how Yukon Men got started. And I think when they came up and they did a promo tape. It was 52 below. It was like January when they came up. A couple of camera guys just trying to get the promo tape made, frostbit themselves the first day, and we took them out on Charlie Wright's. He's another one of the cast guys, Charlie Wright. We took them out on Charlie's trap line and did some stuff with them, and I think it was the minute Discovery looked at the promo tape, they ordered the show. It was one of the fastest turnarounds of promo tapes and airing of the first episode of any show ever, and when they started the show, the film crew didn't leave the village for the first time they came. They didn't leave the village for a year and a half. They just stayed throughout all the seasons and showed the fishing and the training the dogs in the fall, opening up of the trap lines, the hunting, and then the breakup the next spring. They just went through the whole season, and the show. Show just became, never got to be a huge, 10 million viewer type show, but it's just a real steady workhorse. Seems like and I always hear this from, the Discovery, that we have a incredibly loyal, firm, fan base, it's not, it's a real solid, and that's what's made the show last 6 years, and it seems like there's almost more interest now than there was in the beginning, so that's how it all happened.
Do the producers stage conflict? Is any of the reality scripted?
No, they have to take what they film. Most of my filming, especially the stuff done out of town, most of my filming has been done with one camera guy. They'll send sometimes the same person out with you, and if nothing happens on, I don't know how many times, most days that we travel around, he'll be doing scenery shots, get some stuff of me going down a hill with my dogs, going past empty traps that don't have anything in it, and then all of a sudden there's a wolverine in a trap. Then all of a sudden it's time for some moose hunting, and I happen to get a moose, or we run into a whiteout, bad conditions, and that stuff happens all the time. So if the camera guy is just always with me, we run into the stories. The stories don't have to get made. The best stories that we ever made are stories that, that just happen out of the clear blue. That a lot of times, another way stories get made is, they'll hear stories about the river crossings and some of the things that have happened to me. They'll hear, my death-defying stories, of like, going through the ice and stuff like that in certain creeks, and they'll say, really? God, and I'll say, yeah, it happens all the time, at least every couple of years you're going through, the ice and stuff, and almost every year I get a little wet, and so what they do is, every time you're approaching that point, they run up ahead, or the one guy runs up ahead, and he'll set up his camera and be all ready for me, and I'll cross the creek and nothing bad'll happen. And then one time, I don't know, it must have taken 20 times, I remember, of them setting up at a creek one time to get me crossing it. And then finally, it was all caved in from the warm spring water, and I went to make the crossing, and I went through and tipped the sled over, and it wasn't like I was going to die, but I suppose you could have, but it was the exact same creek crossing where I almost did die a couple of times. But what happened at the creek was, boy, on film looked great, and that's how they make the story. They either something just happens, or they anticipate something happening, like my traps. they go ahead of me sometimes. The guys know my trap line so well; they know where all my traps are. They'll go ahead of me, and if there's an animal on a trap, when I get up to the trap, they're all set up, and they get me approaching the trap with my dogs. I stop with my dogs. They got the camera out, and I'm going, yeah, this is a marten, and I'm talking to the camera, and it's pretty mellow. It's like being out with a friend. It's not like there's no lighting guys, no audio guys, no producer, no. It's just me and the cameraman most of the time.
They're observing, not interfering then.
No, they don't ever interfere. Sometimes we do these. You'll see on the show, I'm always wearing my fire department sweatshirt, my signature sweatshirt, and then we'll be doing an interview, and we'll be sitting in a cabin, and like at the end of every, we make a whole bunch of episodes, and then they have to do these explanatory interviews. Well, those things are, they're set up, obviously. I'm not out in the middle of the woods. I'm sitting in a cabin. I'm usually got a cup of coffee next to me, and and they ask me a question about, one of the episodes, like when you were crossing that creek, did you think there was, did anything look bad about the river? And I'd go, yeah, when I was crossing that creek, I could tell there was a little bit of bad ice, but I thought we'd just go right over it. And then, they're just, so some of this stuff isn't like real life. I mean, the interviews are obviously, they're not scripted. They're not telling me what to say. And some shows are. I mean, there's the whole spectrum of reality out there when it comes to shows. Some are totally scripted. The people aren't even from where they say. And then, I can honestly say that our show, they don't do that kind of thing. We're all from the village of Tanana. Now the way the filming goes, they'll take breaks and maybe midwinter around Christmas so they can go home to their families, and they do that kind of thing now. They didn't do it at first, in those first years, but now they'll go home. And when they go home and there's no camera guys around, we're all still running our trap line. We're all still doing, what we're doing. And life doesn't change. If they're here one day and gone the next, there's no change in the way I approach life.
I imagine you're going to live the rest of your life out there. And earlier in the program, you talked about the dogs and taking them out to the woods. If it were up to you, would you simply walk into the woods at the end?
Yeah, I think so, although I think my family would give me a hard time about that. But I have thought that it would be nice to kind of quit before the bitter end and just take a hike to the hills somewhere, and just something like that, just like my dogs, just like the way my dogs, when they get too old, they can't handle the cold anymore, and they're getting, just old and feeble, and I take them someplace special, especially the ones that have been with me for so long, and we go on a special little trip somewhere, and along the Yukon River, or some island somewhere, or out in the hills, and that's the end. And I'd be happy if I ended up like that. But I think I've said that kind of thing to like my my wife or my kids and stuff like that. Just bring me out to 14 Mile Hill, I'll tell them, and they say, no, we're not going to do that, and so, well, we'll see how it all ends here, but, it ends for all of us someday, and I'm not worried about it.
What a story. Great show. Wonderful program. I've really enjoyed myself. To the audience, a brand new season of Yukon Men is coming out there. You got picked up for what now, season 6?
Yeah, season 6. Incredible. Mm-hmm.
returns April 21st, 9, 8 Central on Discovery Channel. Any last words, my friend?
Well, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, and as long as they want to film us, we'll be happy to have them here. And to all the people that have been always making comments on about the show and stuff, and our fans, just thanks for being there. It's you're what makes it all worthwhile, is being able to share our lives with you. I mean, that's honestly why I do it. I'm just trying to show to people, a good side of a lifestyle,
Stan, is there a way for the audience to contact you?
Well, I have, I do have a Facebook page. My daughter, Caitlin, helps me manage my Twitter and my Facebook page. And if people, on the Facebook page, I'll try to put on pictures of what I'm doing. And a lot of times it'll be like the show. I'll put a link to this show on there and stuff like that. People can comment, and I try to, for a few days after I put something on, or my daughter puts something on, I will try to comment. I can't keep up with all the social media stuff or messages or posts or stuff like that. But if you do comment on a post that I put on my Facebook page, I do try to answer those questions. And so that would be a good way to say hi to me if you have a question or want to get in touch with me some other way. I could be done that way.
Right on. The star of Yukon Men, Stan Zuray, returns once again, season 6, April 21st, 9, 8 Central on the Discovery Channel. Stan, thank you so much for being a guest on the program.
It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking with you. And you take care, Russell. Bye-bye now.